So we're talking about cells and energy today, and I'm just giving your cells a lot more energy by feeding you all that sugar. Cells need food, and you know, organisms that are one cell need food, organisms that are lots of cells need food. There's only two ways to get food. One is to make it yourself, and one is to eat somebody else's food, or eat somebody else. So the first strategy is called autotroph. Trophos means to eat. Auto means yourself. So you're eating yourself if you're an autotroph, right? Means you make your own food is the idea. There are two strategies of that. One is photosynthesis, where you make things. Synthesis means to make something, in this case food, from light energy. Photosynthesis are like plants and algae and lots of bacteria, things that can make their energy from the sun. The other strategy is chemosynthesis, and this is where you don't need sunlight to get your energy. You actually find not high energy food molecules, but other kinds of chemical compounds out there that you use to make your food out of. Chemosynthesis is by far the minority of the two strategies of being an autotroph. Chemosynthesis happens usually around volcanic vents in the base of the ocean, where you have very high energy and lots of hot water, but no sunlight. And bacteria and things of that nature down there can make their food from very strange processes. But most of the time, an autotroph photosynthesizes. And so things of that nature would be any of your plant foods that you eat, or any plants even if you don't eat it. They're photosynthetic autotrophs. Algae are photosynthetic autotrophs. Lots of bacteria are photosynthetic autotrophs. You, however, don't make your own food. You don't get to walk outside and go, okay. Okay. That would be great. But you are a heterotroph, and that means you eat somebody else. And so right now you are eating things that Jaylee made. So Jaylee is our producer. But you eat things that some other organism produced. Okay? So heterotrophs are animals and funguses and tons of bacteria. These are things that eat something else. They eat somebody else's food. Okay? Those are the only two strategies out there. And if my slides will advance, that would make my life a lot easier. Come on. Why won't you advance? There you go. Sweet. Okay. So if whether you make the food yourself or you eat somebody else's food, you acquire sugar one way or the other. And that sugar that you acquire is going to be used to make an energy molecule for the cell called adenosine triphosphate. Think of ATP as an energy currency. It's like energy money. The more ATP a cell has, the more stuff it can do. If it runs out of ATP, it's energy poor, and the cell can't do anything, it may die. So sugar, we always think of sugar as the energy source, but a cell doesn't directly burn sugar to do something. A cell will use sugar to make adenosine triphosphate, and then it'll use adenosine triphosphate to do something. So it's the energy currency of the cell. It's a molecule called adenosine that then has 3 phosphate groups joined to it, and each bond between phosphate group and a phosphate group is like a little tiny battery. It's got a ton of energy in a phosphate to phosphate bond. So the cell can rip off one phosphate group and release the energy from that one phosphate bond, or it can rip off 2, or it can rip off all 3 in theory, although it almost never happens. And so the more phosphate groups are stuck onto an adenosine molecule, the more energy that molecule represents. Most of the time it travels with 3, which is why it's called an adenosine triphosphate. If you see an adenosine molecule that has had some of its energy spent to do something, we might call it adenosine diphosphate because it's lost a phosphate group. That energy bond has been broken to create energy to do something. Or it might be adenosine monophosphate, although that's very rare. Usually a cell will take ATP, remove one phosphate group, do something, and then burn some sugar to put another phosphate back on that. That's diphosphate to get triphosphate again. Okay, so I think I have a picture of this molecule for you. Yes, I do. This is adenosine. Okay, it's adenine and a ribose group stuck together. So this together would be adenosine. And then you have 3 phosphate groups hanging off of the side of the sugar. And each bond here between the phosphate groups represents a lot of usable energy. So when they break that bond, it releases the energy. Okay? There you go.
Wait, was that CD?
Yes. Number 2, photosynthesis. So, almost all the food in the world is sugar. And it is captured energy from the sun. And in life science, and you probably see this for the first time, I think, maybe in 4th grade, where you take carbon dioxide and add some water to it, and in the presence of light energy, a cell is able to produce sugar and oxygen gas. That reaction, maybe you didn't have it before in with chemical symbols in 4th grade, but you started to be exposed to the concept that carbon dioxide and water plus light is turned into sugar and oxygen. And your 4th grade teacher might have said something like, plants make oxygen for you to breathe, and you turn it into carbon dioxide that the plants breathe. And isn't that wonderful? And now we're going to be going into much, much, much more detail than your 4th grade teacher did. And that's appropriate because you're no longer in 4th grade. But food for almost all living things is sugar, and that sugar is made through photosynthesis. Okay? So carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of light is turned into sugar, C6H12O6, that's glucose, and oxygen gas, okay? And then you, a consumer, a heterotroph, you do the exact opposite. You take in oxygen, eat somebody else's sugar, and breathe out water vapor and CO2. So we do the exact opposite of this process. I'll give you a moment to write this down, since I heard several people say that. So there's 2 steps in photosynthesis. There's actually a lot more, but there's 2 big categories of steps in photosynthesis. There's the step that takes sunlight, and the step that could happen at night if it wanted to. Okay? So we call the part that has to have sunlight light dependent because it depends on sunlight. And light independent could happen in the daytime, or it could happen at night. It happens whenever the cell jolly well feels like doing that, right? But it doesn't need sunlight to get that second part done, okay? Now, everything that we're about to talk about happens in a part of the cell called a chloroplast. A chloroplast is the green part of a plant cell. When we looked at aloidea leaves last week, the cell itself was clear, but there were little green football-shaped things floating around in the cell. And I think it was in Brianna and Caleb's group, the cell was doing enough photosynthesis that it started stirring in cytoplasm and moving those little footballs around, and you saw some cytoplasmic streaming. Those little things are called chloroplasts, and they are what actually does the photosynthesis. Okay? That's the part of the cell that does it. And if you were to dissect a chloroplast, inside the chloroplast there are other structures. I'll show you a picture here in a minute, called thylakoid membranes. Thylakoid membranes look like stacks of pancakes, but they're green pancakes. Inside a football-shaped structure called the chloroplast. The chloroplast is mostly empty space with these green pancake sorts of things inside it. I'll show you pictures. The thylakoid membrane itself is where the light-dependent reaction happens. Sunlight comes from the sun, through outer space, through our atmosphere, through the clear layers of the leaf, and strikes the thylakoid membrane in the chloroplast in the plant cell. And the thylakoid membrane gets all excited by the sunlight and does the job of the light-dependent reaction. The light-independent reaction, the part that doesn't need sunlight, that could happen in the day, but could also happen in the dark, happens in the spaces between those membranes that we call stroma. So the little green pancakes are called thylakoid membranes, and the gap between them is called stroma. The light-dependent reaction happens in the little green pancakes, and the light-independent reaction happens in the stroma. Okay? I think I have a picture for you. Nope, not yet. Excuse me. Light-dependent reactions have to happen in the daytime. We've already said that. What the light-dependent reaction does is it takes sun energy to split water molecules. So water is hydrogen and oxygen. Oxygen is a waste product. We don't need oxygen. So oxygen is allowed to dissolve out of the leaf and go bye-bye so you can breathe it. Okay, that's where the oxygen comes from. But we want the hydrogen. Hydrogen is what we're after here. We need hydrogen. So the hydrogen part of a water molecule is captured, stored, and a concentration gradient is formed. Concentration gradient means there's more of it somewhere than there is somewhere else. So it makes like a pool of hydrogen. It gathers up the hydrogen and stores it somewhere. And we let the oxygen go. Okay? So I think I have a picture next. Okay, so we have a reservoir of hydrogen. The oxygen has left, and you and I are grateful. We're breathing. The hydrogen, though, is trapped. We're going to use some of those hydrogen ions to power the production of ATP from ADP. Remember ATP, Adenosine Tri-Phosphate? Think of it as like a full battery. The cell can do something with that molecule, right? And the ADP is a partially spent battery. So we're going to recharge some partially dead batteries and make them full batteries with some of this hydrogen ion, okay? Some of it goes to that, and some of it gets trapped and carried by a carrier molecule, NADPH. The H is the hydrogen that has been captured. Don't worry what NADP stands for. It's a long chemical name, NADP. Nice to meet you, okay? Think of NADP as like a taxi cab, and it only takes one kind of customer. It only gathers hydrogen, right? So NADP is a carrier molecule that grabs hydrogen and hangs onto it until the cell says, I need hydrogen, and it says, okay, here you go. Okay? It's like a taxi cab with a hydrogen passenger, and an ATP is like a full battery, and an ADP is like a partially dead battery. Okay? So what we're doing with hydrogen is we're charging some dead batteries, and we're putting some passengers in taxi cabs. And we're going to carry these things over to the next stage. I have a picture here now for you. So this is what we just talked about. This is the light-dependent stage of photosynthesis. So you have some molecules here called photostage 1 and photostage 1 and photostage 2. High school level biology, don't worry about the difference between them. They both are molecules that respond to sunlight energy. Okay? One of them takes water, H2O, and breaks the water with energy from the sun. Oxygen goes away. Okay? And here we have a reservoir of hydrogen being built up on this side of the membrane. Hydrogen is piling up over here. Okay? And then some of the energy that's released, some of the hydrogen energy that's released, goes through a bunch of enzymes that you don't need to know the name of, PR or PHQ and B6F. Don't worry about the names of these things. But what we're doing is we're pumping more hydrogen in from the outside into the inside of this membrane area. So I'm pumping hydrogen in from the outside, and I am making hydrogen by splitting water. All of that means I'm getting a ton of hydrogen over here. Okay? And so some of that hydrogen is going to be captured by NADP and turned into NADPH, right? So it's going to sit in this taxi cab until we need it again later. And some of this hydrogen goes through a protein channel called ATP synthase. And as the hydrogen flows through here and is released, we're making ADP and ATP. We're charging batteries. You guys ever seen a dam? The river flows and it's backed up, and then as the water flows through the dam, the pouring energy turns turbines and makes electricity. You've seen that, right? Think of this as that same sort of thing. We're letting a bunch of hydrogen pile up, and then as we let the hydrogen leak through this channel, the energy of the electron, the electric current that's being created by the hydrogen going through, charges a battery. Okay? So it's like a dam upside down. Think of it that way. So I am splitting water, letting the oxygen go bye-bye, gathering as much hydrogen as I can in one place, filling up some carrier molecules, and charging some batteries. That's the light-dependent stage. Any questions at this point for the light-dependent stage? You don't need to know the names of any of those enzymes. Just know that that's the general gist of what's happening.
If you were to draw it, is that how you would?
You could. There's a better picture. This is more college level knowledge than high school level knowledge, but I thought it might be helpful to you. Okay. So now we're going to do the light independent cycle. So all of that stuff that I just showed you happens in the light. And now we have things that happen either in the light or in the dark. It doesn't matter. Okay. This takes the hydrogen that NADPH brought over, that the taxi cab has his passenger, right? He carries him over to the Calvin cycle. And ATP brings the trapped energy, these charged batteries. And we use energy and hydrogen to add to carbon dioxide and make oxygen. Make sugar. Sugar, remember, is C6H12O6, 6 carbons, 6 hydrogens, 12 C6H12, sorry, other way around, 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. And so the carbon and the oxygen comes from CO2. You and I produce that as a waste product of our metabolism. All animals and funguses and lots of bacteria do too. And so that CO2 is out in the atmosphere. The cells absorb the CO2, uses energy and hydrogen that we made in the light-dependent stage, and then there is a very complicated series of reactions that puts it all together and makes sugar. I will not make you know the steps of the Calvin cycle. You will when you take biology in college, and so you will at some point get to see it. And if you're a biology major and you take biochem, you get to go even more deep into it. But for right now, it's just a series of reactions that add CO2, hydrogen, and energy together to make sugar. Okay? Here's a picture of it. You don't need to know this level of detail, but here's a picture of it. We have carbon dioxide, and we take 3 of these CO2s together, and we make ourselves a 6-carbon molecule with a bunch of these, with a bunch of CO2s. And then we break it down a little bit, and we're taking energy as we go, and then we're adding some hydrogen to it, and half of that chain comes out as sugar, and half of it goes back in and picks up more CO2, and we spend some energy, we add some hydrogen, we get some sugar, and around and around and around it goes. And it's even more complicated than that picture, but for right now, all you need to know: carbon dioxide in, hydrogen and energy in, sugar out. Okay, that's the Calvin cycle. So if you look at one diagram that has it all, here we have a chloroplast. Here we have the little green pancakes of the thylakoid membranes, and there's not only 2 of them in a chloroplast, there's hundreds of them, but for the sake of the diagram, they drew 2. The light hits the membranes in here, the thylakoid membranes, that takes water in, releases the oxygen, puts the hydrogen in the NADP hydrogen taxi, charges up some ATP, sends it over to the Calvin cycle, where we gather some CO2 from the atmosphere, Carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen with some energy makes sugar. And now we have empty hydrogen carriers and partially decharged batteries that are going to flow back over here and get their stuff fixed. Okay? So that is photosynthesis. What questions do you guys have? What can I help you with? What can I help you with? Any questions, things you want repeated, explained better? You understand the basic idea?
Yes.
Cool. That's good to hear. Alrighty.